and promote completion for all students from all backgrounds. Dr. Burns was named one of the 16 most innovative people in higher education by Washington Monthly. She is the founding executive director of University Innovation Alliance, and I would like you to join me in welcoming Dr. Burns to the stage.
I don't know if I'm on. I'm on. Awesome. I mean, congratulations. Look at you wearing your shoes and your pants. I mean, how many of you are able to fit into pre-COVID pants? Is there anyone? Oh, bless your heart. Somebody figured out a new activity while we were all just kind of snacking our way. The 2 times I've been out on the road thus far, I have split a pair of pants. So what I would like to draw your attention to is these are called insurance. So I am so honored to be here today with you, and I can't wait to have a conversation about what you're working on, but also I want to share with you what I've learned over the past 8 years helping universities reimagine themselves and transform themselves around vulnerable students. And my hope is that in the process that you can sift through and find some things that are going to be useful to you in your work, and the stuff that doesn't, just ignore. Sound good? Okay, so you heard a little bit about my background, and those are not technically lies, those are true. But the part about my background that probably matters more is that I grew up in poverty in rural Montana. I was in a family of 4 living on less than $20,000 a year. So I was definitely not supposed to probably be standing on stage here today. I grew up in a family where there was no conversation about going to college. Well, at least no helpful conversation. My dad would give me terrible advice. Like he would always say over and over that if I really wanted to go to college, I should do what my brother did and win a state championship in wrestling. Yeah, totally helpful. So like a lot of our low-income, first-generation students of color, and I would say also adult learners, they're given a lot of terrible advice, right? And so what I did is I sifted through that bad advice and I found some pieces to follow. And the pieces I decided to put together were that if I was really exceptional at something, I would get to go to college. And so I focused exclusively on this idea of winning a state championship or being good at something, completely neglected my studies, and barely eked out of high school with a 2.3 GPA, but I was an undefeated state champion in wrestling. Just kidding, it was debate. But you were with me for a second. I saw you. You were kind of assessing, like, what weight class was she in? Turns out there's not as much interest in a mediocre student who can argue about it as there is a Big Ten wrestler. So I discovered that I really had nowhere to go. And so I luckily stumbled to a community college. And when I got there, I had some beliefs that I think are shared by a lot of our students that we need to talk about, which is that I showed up and I figured out I had this really complicated form to tell them how much my parents my money made, like how much income we had. Like I had to do all these hoops to get there. And when I showed up, I thought, because I had been taught to respect my elders, and these people are literally the smart people, I thought that someone would naturally pay attention and tell me if I was off track, that someone would, it makes logical sense. And this is what our students expect, is that we're literally, we puff ourselves up and make you call us doctor, and we have these fancy institutions. And so of course they would assume that we know what we're doing. And we're gonna definitely, if you get off course, we've got your back, it'll be fine. And I don't need to surprise any of you with the fact that I took very interesting classes that had something to do with my program of study, but not much. And I followed the Choose Your Own Adventure map that we hand every student. And I managed to barely eke out 7 years later with my bachelor's degree, with 50 extra credits that I didn't need, and $50,000 in student loans. And this is the best case scenario. What I discovered along the way is that nobody was watching. Turns out our data systems don't actually speak to each other. It turns out that people are so overwhelmed, they don't have time to identify when I was off track. They were too busy triaging other fires. And so this is not something that indicates that people don't care about students. This is really more about the fact that higher education was never actually designed around students. And this is at the center of everything I do. And it's probably at the center of what you do. If you can accept that everything you run into is a design problem, you are going to have a much easier time. And especially when we talk about adult learners, we know it was not designed around them unless they think that somehow getting leftovers or a night class every once in a while, or a prepackaged MBA, or a Zoom class that we let you sit on, if we think that's good design. Higher education was never centering this experience of students, especially low income, first generation, and students of color. Higher education was actually first formed in this country. When it was designed around the needs of the faculty. And that's not something like a slight against faculty. The truth is, you know who's most upset about that? The faculty. Because they have a front row seat to watch students walk out their door every single day for a totally predictable reason that they've already raised their hand about 5 times. We shouldn't be centering others in our design. We should definitely be centering the customer, the client, the student. I know those words that are toxic and you're not allowed to use in higher ed, but we actually should think about what they need. You know, especially as we think about the new normal, students this day and age, they're very comfortable with you using their data. All I ask is that you make it easy for me to check out at the end on my Amazon cart. All I ask is that you make sure I have a good experience, right? So students are very comfortable with us being able to use the data and use the information that we have about their experience as long as we actually make things work for them. But the problem is we're not doing that. Now, it's not just because our design initially didn't center students, and especially 18 to 22-year-olds, but it's also that we have this thing called isomorphism. And I promise you this is good news. Isomorphism is this basic idea that we all kind of replicate each other's design. Colleges, universities, most community colleges, workforce office, like in general, it's similar to hospitals. They all have kind of the same types of offices, the same kind of design, because what we do is we look elsewhere and we say, okay, that's an example of a college, so I'm just going to create that. That's why we have things like bursars, even though no one knows what that means, right? And isomorphism is really just based on this idea that like we're just trying to figure this out as we go, and so we're going to just copy other people's design. The good news here is that because of that, it means that we all pretty much have the same problems. And what I want you to take away from today is an understanding that your challenges that you're dealing with in terms of serving your students better, those are actually the opportunity for you to come together and to collaborate, because that means that you're going to be able to move faster. What I have seen is that nobody has special or different problems. They might be a different size, shape, or location, but generally speaking, the challenges facing our sector, the challenges facing students really, are all the same. And we have to give ourselves the benefit of the wisdom of our experience and come together, because more heads are better than one. So isomorphism is, this idea that is super easy for us to figure out, right? It's just, you can see it, that there's a replicated design. But what I want you to take from this is that when we first designed universities in this country, it's not just that we borrowed a design from elsewhere. Because in the US, what we did is we borrowed a design from abroad. It's that we also borrowed a value system. And that value system is failing our students. That value system says that if you are a small or exclusive institution, that you are better. That's like saying, rare equals good. That's kind of like saying that I have a really great doctor. I've never seen them because I can't get in, but they must be so good, Rare is not actually serving us. We should focus instead on the indicators of quality that you are getting from your students. It also has this really problematic belief in our value system, which is that if a student drops out, that it's their fault. And if they're a low income, a first generation, a student of color, or an adult learner, that they have special problems, so we should just bolt on a solution. We'll create a center for them. We'll launch an initiative for them. But what it does is it distracts us from being able to actually fix design, because we never actually center that information in the experience of the student we're designing for. And I would just say that when you lose a student from any of those backgrounds, especially adult learners, as you all know, that we should actually take that as the leading indicator. Those are the students that's the information that's telling us there's a problem in the system, there's a problem in our design, and it's not serving these students, but they are just students like everyone else. And if we actually make sure that things work for them, then all students will be better. Because it means we'll address like over-communication, under-communication, choose your own adventure maps that never really worked for anyone, or any of the challenges that we face for our students. So this is just a basic concept, but I just want to make sure that we start with the understanding that it's about design, that the problems that you have and that we see throughout higher education, they're all the same, and that we actually can come together as a result. But that also we should see things from a systems perspective. Because all of the things that we're working on in little tiny boutique ways, little bolt-on solutions and such, that what they're really telling us is that it was never designed around students, and we should actually focus on the system as a whole, because it was perfectly designed to achieve what it is. Does that make sense? Good basics? Okay. The other part that I want to point out is that the design for the past will not serve students of the future. They just won't. The future, the new normal, students are going to make decisions based on what type of post-secondary experience helps them learn best. And in the future, they will actually expect to know the type of modality that works for them. They will expect that you can actually communicate exactly what you're offering in a way that they can understand. And the experience will much more center their needs. The students of the future are older. They do not look like the imaginary students that we designed our institutions not really around. And they are definitely going to have an expectation that we actually do the work of not just fixing little tiny problems around the edges. And I know this not just because I am seeing it daily, but I see it in the broader data. Back when we first started our work, what we saw is there's a massive shortfall of college degrees, that we're simply not doing a good enough job when it comes to aligning with workforce. What we offer, super cool 20 years ago. We would be super in back then, but we actually need to have real, meaningful conversations with workforce about what they need. And those shouldn't be one-sided. They shouldn't be, hey, I have a degree program to sell your people. They should actually lead with curiosity. What upskilling do you need within your workforce? And specifically, where in your organization are those people who need those new skills, so I can understand where we need to start with? And what kind of modality could we actually talk? Do we need to do this virtually? Do we need to do this in person? I mean, that's how you partner, is you start by listening. We are often too busy pitching and trying to sell what we already have to offer in a prepackaged box. And the students of the future, we have to stop thinking in terms of boxes. We right now think of students as either you are enrolled or you are not, and I'm out. And students, we assume that you're going to want a box of a degree, that you're going to want this thing right here. And the truth is, they don't necessarily even want a degree, as you know. They're wanting a course, they're wanting a skill, they're wanting a new competency. They're just looking for us to actually create something that actually meets their needs. And perhaps it would require us to listen more than we talk. But this misalignment with workforce, it really has to be addressed. The other part of this gap, where we're not producing enough college degrees to keep up with the economic competitiveness needs of our country, it's also rooted in the fact that we fail half of all the students who walk in our door. That's ultimately going to be the big challenge that all institutions have to work on. And I don't think that we can do these things and we're going to make any progress if we don't team up on them. The second piece that matters is that for the first time in US history, low-income students are the majority in public K-12. Now, I know that we're talking about adult learners, but this is important context, because as institutions start recognizing what's going on in terms of needing to serve more adult learners, they're also going to be looking at their design and how they serve this population, because they're going to need to find a way to have something in common. Low-income students, that shouldn't be too shocking. This is old news, but the problem is this is how poorly we do with that population. Students who are born in my income quartile are in that bottom red line. Back in the 70s, 6 out of 100 people who were born into poverty would get a college degree, bachelor's. And after all this progress and innovation, It's only about now updated, these slides, I don't have the full picture for you, but we've actually run the data, it's 9%. So 9 out of 100. So basically no progress. High income students are killing it though. When we talk about the achievement gap, the equity gap, this is what we're talking about when it comes to social mobility. It's that people, back then 40% out of 100 were getting a bachelor's. Now it's doubled, which just means that we actually can make progress, folks. It's just that we doubled our equity gap. So these things, I'm not intending to bum you out. That is just context to understand that if we're going to have more students that we need to serve, and we also need to reimagine our design for adult learners, that we're going to need to make sure that we step up our performance when it comes to low-income students. And I've spent the past 8 years working with institutions who wanted to figure out how they could do this and how they could do it together. And if there's nothing else you hear from me today, it's that going it alone is a massive waste of time, energy, and money. And students are the ones who write those checks. Our institutions are just, they're large public research universities, but it's not because that's the right institution. It's that is the most resistant to change when it comes to sectors. And my institutions decided to finally put aside their differences. They had no reason to actually trust each other or know each other or work together. And they decided to team up and start talking about the things they were failing at, talking about the things that were hard, and figure out what they could do by learning from each other, what ideas they could scale from campus to campus. And that's where we spend most of our time, and that's where my advice is going to come from. But here's how to make it actually make sense. When I explain what I do, how many of you, if you have family members who try and describe what you do for a living, the words they're not even the same hemisphere, right? My parents, I think, believe I'm still in college. So I have to really break it down. I help universities share ideas about how to help low-income students. But really what I do when I'm in an elevator, I explain, I basically run the world's largest Weight Watchers meeting for universities to be better at something they've never been good at. And it's true because a lot of the best ideas, when you talk about innovation and creativity and change, the best ideas are not in universities. Don't tell anyone I said that, okay? That's just between me and you. The best ideas are in other spaces. So for me, I was in Weight Watchers. I know with the pants situation, obviously I should head back, but stay with me. The Weight Watchers has this very basic concept, and if you think about it, change and innovation, that's hard. Well, guess what? Losing weight is hard for everyone, right? So the design is very basic. It's that no one can sign you up for Weight Watchers. You actually have to decide that you're going to do this. With my institutions, I'm not interested in convincing people that you should care about low-income, first-generation students of color. And you should not care about institutions that you need to convince that they should care about adult learners. You are on board or you're not. When we're talking about building a collaboration, you obviously have allies potentially in this room, and I would just encourage you to use that. So, find folks who believe what you believe. Number 2, there's always a sweet little old lady near the front that you walk into Weight Watchers and she's standing next to a scale. Everyone weighs in on the same scale. And when you do well or you lose weight, they're, yay, high five. And if you don't, that's fine. Welcome, thanks for coming back. We think in higher education that shame drives behavior change, but it doesn't. I find that actually praising people for behavior, that is really what drives change. You know what really drives change? Jealousy. So what I do is I find a university that's doing, one of my campuses, don't tell anyone I said this, but if you want someone to do something, find who they see as kind of like their competitor and then praise that competitor in front of them for doing the thing that you want them to do. I think it's worked for me for 8 years, right? This is why universities are always like, oh yeah, we're competing with so-and-so, or look at rankings and stuff. We really are designing these experiences for jealousy to be our driver. So just use that. So at Weight Watchers, the key piece though is now my campuses transparently share their data down to student unit record level, and they update them annually. Same scale. But the piece that matters is you walk into a back room at Weight Watchers and there's a safe space for you to talk about the things that are hard with other people who are also struggling. This is your potential Weight Watchers meeting. These folks in this room, whether you work on the workforce side, whether you're at a community college, whether you're at a university, whether you're in K-12, you're all struggling with similar challenges around how we make sure that we can drive change as a sector to better serve adult learners. We have to figure out how we can support them regardless of the hurdles that are popping up. And these are the folks who can help you. So at Weight Watchers, like that, I gave you that example because I just feel like it's so much easier to understand. Also, they should start paying me a commission. I mean, if anyone signs up because of today, you know, so Weight Watchers is that's the example. There are other things like the healthcare improvement communities. There are all kinds of spaces where innovation's happening outside of higher education. And you should be hopeful about this because it works. Like this kind of basic design, it works. This is data that has never been seen, even by my presidents, because it came out this morning. I had to update these slides. We have managed since 2014, we are now we've increased our low-income graduates by 45% annually. We've also increased the number of graduates of color annually by 85%. And we've now just produced 97,000 additional graduates that we were not on track to produce when we first started. So I'm giving you this not because I think, oh, thank you, yes. I think it's best for society that I actually educate no one. So I'm not responsible for any of that. It's my campuses who do all the actual work. But I will take credit and I will pass it back for them. So this is just to let you know that anything that you hear about how innovation and collaboration and scale, it doesn't actually work in higher ed, but it does. And I want to make sure that this information is actually going to help you as you transition back to serving students in the new normal. As I said, the new normal, it's got to have digital. Stop treating online learning like it's an afterthought. We all know Zoom U, it's embarrassing. I took online classes when I was in college, and I was totally embarrassed to discover that it's basically unchanged in most cases. We're also not very educated about what good is in that space. Like, I've never met anyone who's taken the same type of online class from multiple different types of institutions to be able to be informed about saying, like, no, this is good. That's something we should actually do. We should actually give ourselves the benefit of wisdom. I will tell you what we all know. Zoom U ain't it, right? You know, just giving people the chance to listen and passing, that is not actually sufficient. So I would say it's got to have digital as a component. It has to actually be intentional. And that means that actually creating space for faculty and students and administrators to talk about this. What actually got better or easier virtually? Let's actually create space for it. I know people have talked about this. They've said, I want to make sure let's go back to the stuff that needed to be in person and let's leave the stuff that should be virtual. That's fine, I agree. But I am not seeing a behavior change in my sector where people are creating intentional space, collaborative space for people to actually talk about that topic, to ideate and brainstorm about what things need to keep going out of the pandemic. We're covering it and then we move on. The students are obviously going to be older. They are going to be challenged by many new things. Growing up and living in this kind of society right now, it's just hard. We have to have a mental health component. Students expect that. They expect equity to be absolutely centered in our institutions. It's embarrassing that it's treated like an afterthought or that it just became a thing that people were aware of in the last 2 years. So institutions really, it cannot be something that's a side item. Students, I mean, it's 2021, right? And students are expecting that they get good experience. They expect it to be like checking out at Amazon. And so I know, like, issues about Jeff Bezos, but I'm just saying, you all have the app too, right? You all have to hide the boxes when they come in the door too. I mean, I am not the only one, okay? As we prepare for the new normal, there are a few data points that are useful. You already know this, but it's essentially that everyone is experiencing enrollment loss. And other than that little tiny green, which is basically Harvard, the reason I'm sharing this with you is that this tells you that you will not market your way out of this enrollment challenge. There is not a special message that will fix this. And other institutions who aren't at this conference, who don't actually already think about adult learners, they are going to wake up to this reality about 18 to 22-year-olds very soon. And when they do, What I want is for you to have the competitive advantage because you actually worked on your design. You found ways to work together because you saw this and you've been working on it for a long time. I bet there is so much wisdom in this room that could be brought to bear on this issue, and not just for your own institution, for the collective. That's the reason why you're involved at CAEL. That's the reason why you're here, and I just want to encourage you to leverage your time here to find buddies that you're going to help and work with as we leave. The other thing is that this is broken down by state, so if you want to personalize it, this is where the enrollment loss is going to happen. Like, unless you're in those few states that you see blue, you're generally seeing that it's going to be a massive decline. And so again, you cannot market your way out of this. It is going to require you to do the actual work together. And this is not going to go away, especially when we think about, again, if we're thinking just 18 to 22-year-olds, and this is really what's going to shift institutions. They're going to wake up to this reality soon. They don't quite know it yet. The birth rate is going down. What that means is that we're not even replacing ourselves, and the population that most higher education was theoretically centering is going to go, it's going to dramatically lower. And as a result, they're going to look around and they're going to see where can I get some more students? And that scramble is not centering students. It's not the way to go. And again, I think that you guys can have a competitive advantage if you actually work on design. I want to first pause before I explain this slide because I realize you've been sitting for a little bit. If you're physically able, would you mind standing for a second? You can play some music if you want. I mean, I was the hip hop array. I mean, I was like, man, that's my jam. That's so awesome. Feel free to stretch out a bit. So here's the thing. You've been sitting for 20 minutes, a little bit longer actually. Your brain produces a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. BDNF enables you to take on and retain new ideas. After you've been sitting for 20 minutes, you produce less. How long are our lectures? Yeah, it turns out we actually have smart people in higher education and workforce who we could actually bring their wisdom to bear and actually do a better job for our students. Oh yes, thank you. I want to give a shout out to the music crew, the team here. Yes, yes. I love it, I love it. If anyone wants to get up here and dance, I did sprain my ankle, and I just want you all to know it's been 2 weeks, and my goal was to be able to wear heels for you, and so you're welcome. Anyway, so feel free to stand as long as you want, because again, you got to move around, get the blood flow, because I want you to be able to retain new ideas. The point of that story, one, you can use it anytime you're in a terrible meeting for longer than 20 minutes. But the other thing is I want you to be able to remember that, again, there's actually research and evidence inside our own sector that we could be using to make things better that we aren't. So this is a slide I stole from Michael Crow at Arizona State. And the story behind the slide is basically that people are kind of we have this idea that people are 3 types of people. And we've designed all of our systems around this idea that, you know, if you're a person who is you're not gonna go to college, this is the segment. You start in pre-K, K-12, and then you just spend your whole life in your career. Or maybe you're a different type of person and you're a technical school person, so then you go there, and then move your rest of your career. And then graduate, right? And that's how we've designed everything, is based on this very basic understanding that we know, you know, is fundamentally not true because of who adult learners are, and especially the growing number that need to be served. The future requires that we actually reimagine not just our design, but how we think about our design, which is we have to imagine that the future is not students in a box. It is universal learners. It is people who are actually coming and going from the institution. You come and go when you need to learn and grow. Now, I actually have personal experience with adult learners because my dad was one. I told you that I grew up in poverty, but the color behind it is that my dad was one of those people who, you know, when they ask that question, is college for everyone? Well, that question, is college for everyone or post-secondary, I just think is really offensive, and we need to not allow that word, that sentence to come out of our mouths, because it assumes you are one type of person or not. And that you have to make that decision at one point in your life or not. When the truth is, we hope that people evolve and grow and their needs grow and evolve over time. And we have to evolve what we do to meet that. My dad thought he wasn't someone who was college going. He was a college guy. He tried it, dropped out right away. So he joins the military, and after he serves, he comes back and he has to figure out what he's gonna do. And so he went to farrier school and became a horseshoer. And one day, when I was 2 years old, my dad went to work and a horse flipped over on him and paralyzed him from the waist down. And so like millions of other people in the last 2 years, he went from being someone who could earn a living because he could use his body and for work. And all of a sudden he had to find a way to pivot into a knowledge economy. And he didn't think he was a college-going person, which is why we shouldn't allow that question. Thankfully, he then decided to cash in his GI Bill and went to Montana State University and got a bachelor's degree in computer science. Now things are a little bit more complicated when you're in a wheelchair, so the earning potential wasn't quite the same, but it didn't matter because when he was at Montana State, it wasn't just the learning in the classroom, and this is why we need to not just reimagine our classrooms for adult learners, is that my dad, when he went back, he discovered that he still could be an athlete because he started playing wheelchair basketball. He started wheeling races. And when I was like 6 years old, he won the world championships in wheelchair racing because that's what college can do. Yeah. Higher education reminded him of who he could be. It gave him a chance to not just in the classroom, but outside. We can't just assume that because adult learners they don't have a lot of time and energy, we're just gonna give them some classes and get them out the door. They actually need to benefit from the entire holistic experience of higher education. So that's what universal learning and thinking about things from that perspective will do. And the other piece I want to talk to you about really quickly are some of the challenges if you're going to do some of this design work together. The first is, I just want to prepare you, this is what you look like right now. Yeah, I mean, we're all in agreement. Exhaustion, fatigue, burnout, very real topics that he's going to just keep doing that. It's actually worth our energy to address them. But this is actually how you look like pre-COVID and in the future, is that we have this idea in higher education, and I think it's partially true from the stories I hear from folks in workforce, that if we just give you more work, that your plate will expand. And we don't actually give you intentional time. You know what the biggest challenge for student success is? It's my calendar and my email, right? We have no time to think intentionally and to ideate and to brainstorm and to talk about the future. We're too busy going from meeting to meeting to meeting and triaging, right? How we spend our time, we have millions of hours of smart people who care about students showing up every day, and we're not leveraging it in an intentional way. We have to be smart about our capacity. Whenever I go to a college campus, have you seen this guy in the gym? When I'll go back just so you don't have to see that again. Every time I come to a college campus, people are always trying to show me all the cool stuff they're doing. And every time it looks like that guy in the gym where I'm like, why that now? Why did you pick that order? How are you gonna know if it works? How are you measuring it? They have actually no plan. So this slide says you actually need a plan and a way that you're gonna know that something works. But even if you do have a plan, this is what it's like if you have questions in higher ed. I know, right? Santiago, right? That's where, for those of you who are Anchorman fans, this is where it's happened, right? This is where the magic happened. But if you have questions in higher ed about what other people have learned by doing something, this is what it's like to ask. We are set up, our value system in the sector, to say, yeah, I'm going to talk to you about how awesome I am, instead of talk about the failure. We have to create social safety and talk about things that we have learned from things that didn't go well, and the best place to do that is in this room. So, in my last few minutes here, I'm going to share the things that helped us. First, if you're going to work together, I want you to think about yourself in terms of, you all have your different spaces that you work in. You're all special in different heights. You're all these different mountaintops, just like I think about universities. And the thing is, if we focus our time and attention talking about the tops of our mountains or the good things we've done, or how special and different our institution is, or I do this over here, we don't actually drive connection. If you want to drive connection and community, focus on the valleys. Focus on the thing you have in common, which is the problems. They're all the same. It doesn't matter how tall you are. At institutions, I always try and encourage them to actually talk about the stuff they're struggling with. If you can create that space for them, that will drive accelerated connection. No matter who you are, whatever challenge you're facing, especially when it comes to serving students, the most radical innovation out there is a Post-it note. My campuses have found ways to reimagine the student experience through a very basic concept that any one of you could use today. It's called process mapping. And literally, the name kind of explains it, okay? You put a Post-it note up on the wall in a group, in a room full of other people who work in that same space, and you want to put a Post-it note up for every step in their process, in their journey. And at the end of that time, you take a step back and you're going to see what you see you can't unsee. Everyone saw the problem happen. Everyone sees how complicated your systems are, as much as you talk about them being great. And so what I want you to understand is that process mapping is one of the things you could do right now, even before you leave this conference. You could decide to meet back with folks and be able to talk about the ways that you can improve adult learners' experience. This is an example of when we did this. At Michigan State, they decided to map a 3-month window of time from the day the student gets admitted to the day they show up on campus. And when they did this, they put a Post-it note up for every email. They put a Post-it note up for every hold, for every major change, all those things. And when they took a step back, they saw that they were sending 450 emails to every incoming student. And there were 50 types of holds that a student could have on their account the institution didn't know about. The fact that I can tell you that story and keep my job is radical. We don't talk about this stuff. We don't share the wisdom. If you don't know what your institution's number is, it's 500 emails. Because we never give ourselves the intentional time to actually take a look at how are we meeting the needs of our students. And when it comes to adult learners, this is one of the most basic things I would recommend. Is at your institution, get everyone in the room who believes that they work on something serving students, and let's just process map the adult learner experience. How do we communicate with them? What kind of messages do we send? What kind of expectations about knowledge do we have for them when they step on campus? And it will be impossible for you to continue to do those things because everyone in the room hears and sees the same thing. I want to tell you that innovation is a chatbot, but it's not. The most innovative thing that can happen is you actually give people on your campus time to look at your design together and be able to address where there are places where there are booby traps and landmines, because they aren't set on purpose, but they are definitely tripping up our students. And this is the easy way that doesn't require any money. I wanted to make sure I came here with some goods for you that you could use right away. So, process mapping is something you can do. Don't think that innovation needs to happen at a center that's over here on the corner of campus. People keep launching these Center for Innovation or a Vice President for Innovation up here on top. It presumes that people who work in your space are not innovators, and that you have to shove innovation down into the institution, or that you have to go over there because that's where the innovation sits. And what we have found is you're all capable of innovation. You just need someone to come in underneath you and actually lighten your load. You need the chance to have a meeting time window where you don't have an agenda. You need to have time where you don't have stuff on your calendar, so you can actually think about the experience of your students and you can spend time really ideating. This is a very basic premise, but I promise you, this is the thing that actually helps with the capacity. The last few things I would share that will be useful for you to take away and put in your pocket is that you need a strategy for failure. The places that are innovative have an autopsy process where you make it socially safe to talk about things that didn't go well. And I don't mean, oh my God, I cannot believe that Doug did that. I mean, let's have a conversation about what we learned from this experience. Every one of you has a multi-million-dollar failure that happened on your campus or in your organization at some point in time, and we just don't talk about it. And that forces others to repeat those mistakes. And the way that we can address that is creating an intentional internal autopsy process where it's okay and in fact rewarded for us to talk about what we learned from failure. You need to also think about where you get new ideas. I think a lot of you are going to come away from CAEL with good new ideas, and I think you should pay attention to that. Most institutions, when I ask them, where did this cool new thing come from, they've never asked themselves that question. And if you don't know where good ideas or new ideas come from, If it's when Doug goes to that conference, or when so-and-so has a retreat, or when that team actually has an offsite, or maybe you actually just took a 2-week vacation, like whatever it is, if you don't talk about how, you don't get more of them. Think about and start asking the question of, where did this idea come from? The last piece I want you to do is think about the habits that an institution who truly cared about adult learners, an institution that eliminated their equity gaps, an institution that centered adult learners in their design, what kind of habits would that institution have? Would they do one-off sessions? Would they have a retreat once a year, or would they actually check in every month with an open agenda? Would they spend time with each other that is intentional and consistent? I recently learned how to meditate. It took me years because I was so worried about getting it perfect. And once I stopped thinking about being a meditator and I focused on just the habit of meditation, things became better. I was trying to like transcendental, is it 20 minutes? Do I need to be doing a yoga move? Like, what's the deal? And it turns out like I take a couple breaths every morning. Sometimes it's 2 minutes, sometimes it's 10. It doesn't matter because I do it consistently. Your institution, your organization, the work that you do is totally a reflection of the habits that you have. So think about your institution, just like with New Year's resolutions, like what are the habits that we've ingrained that help us either be innovative and serve our students or not? I hope this has been useful to you because I want you to understand, I want to cross that out and actually have it say, when universities and workforce collaborate, adult learners win. This is how we can actually address the challenges of tomorrow, and we can adapt our institutions, leveraging the incredible wisdom that came from the last 2 years. You all have done things you were never supposed to do. You were able to do things that still to this day, you don't want to do. And so I want you to leave today with the confidence that you can figure stuff out. You can do new things. And our students need you to have that confidence to address the challenges ahead. I hope this has been useful for you. Thank you for the time. Thank you. Oh, is anybody getting this on camera? You see this happen? I'm just kidding. I'm like, in case you're tired of sitting, I'm just kidding. No, thank you. I have apparently time for one question. Okay. It's going to be, so much pressure on this question, right? I like to start mine with what's your deal? That's my favorite icebreaker. So, yeah, if anyone wants to start with one question. Who's brave? Yay, happy to whatever it is. I'm just kidding, there's not any actual pressure.
I really hope it's a good question. Thank you for this inspiring presentation you've given. How do you overcome, you're inviting institutions to collaborate. How do institutions who presumably are also kind of competing with each other, how do you overcome that barrier?
Just identify where they compete, right? For a long time, online was off the table for my campuses because you could drive into Orlando and see an ASU sign for ASU Online, right? So you don't compete on everything though. Like, I would love it if people competed to do the best job to help low-income students, right? You can parametricize your work so that it's specifically the spaces where people are struggling. I find that collaboration is best done if you are doing a shared, you invite people to address a shared problem or a goal that is bigger than what they can achieve on their own. Those are the two things: shared goal, shared problem. Otherwise, don't do it, because honestly, collaboration is so valuable that we deserve to not be demoralized when we go to another bummer collaborative that wasn't well designed, right? Like, you're there, and by the way, like systems, I used to work in a university system. There's a lot of stuff out there that we think is like, because we forced a lot of people in a room together, that's collaboration. No, that's not. And there's nothing wrong with universities. They're valuable and powerful. But just be intentional that when you're trying when you're doing collaborative work, that you actually understand that there's stuff that you do in a room together. There's some stuff that you do that we're going to do at the same time, and we're going to happen to be sharing information. But when we're talking about shared collaborative innovation work, like, shared problem, big goal that you can only accomplish together. And that will keep it so you have clear boundaries and you feel you want to create social safety for folks, and that's the way to do it. World's greatest question. Thank you so much. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.